Okay, this is completing the square, but before we start on this, I want you to come in and pull in a sheet of paper. Well, before we start on this, let's take a look at what we've got. So oftentimes we see equations which look like this. All right. Now, we're not going to actually solve for y and take the square root. We're going to use grapher. Let's come back in and actually take a look at what this thing is. Now, the important thing here, you notice your x squared and y squared are both positive, and they both have the same coefficient. This means we're going to be dealing with a circle. Let's pull up and actually graph this thing. So here we got y equals, that's not what we want. So we're going to put in our x squared plus 6x plus y squared equals 7. All right, and there we go. Now this is what's called general form. And as you can tell, it's very difficult if I just gave you that and I didn't allow you to use grapher, and you will not be allowed to use grapher on this. It's going to be very difficult to do it. So here we have our circle. So there's our center. It's at -3, 0. And our radius is 4. So the working form of this equation then is going to be x plus 3 squared plus y squared equals 16. So this is the form we want. The form we got is up here. And what we're going to do then is we're going to be using completing the square to go from this general form to this working form, which is something we can graph. Okay, so let's get out a sheet of paper then before we do this. And there's always been some confusion on this, and I want to show you where all this is coming from. Now, the reason we did the squaring forwards and backwards was to set this thing up with this thing. But let's take a look then at what x plus 3 squared looks like. So that is the same as x plus 3 times x plus 3. You distribute. So it's going to come out to be x squared plus 3x plus 3x plus 9, which is x squared plus 6x plus 9. So that gives me x plus 3 squared. Now, and the important thing on completing the squares is to take a look at the correlation here between this 6 and this 3. You notice that this is twice what this is, all right? And what you're going to be faced with, actually, is something which looks like x squared plus 6x. That's all you've got. So we're going to need to complete this square by putting this number in here. And that's what this thing does. Because we want to take this and make it look like this for conic sections. Okay, well, let's take a look at another one. Let's just do x minus 4 squared, which is going to be x minus 4 times x minus 4. We distribute it. That gives me x squared minus 4x minus 4x plus 16, which gives me x squared minus 8x plus 16. And again, that is my x minus 4 squared equals this. And again, notice the correlation here between this and this. All right? So if you'll notice, we don't have an x here, but this, when you expand it, gets us this. All right? But what we want to do with conics is go this way. Take this and make it look like this. And this is the completing the square. Okay, so let's come back in then and pull up our completing the square paper. All right? So how do we go from one to the other of these? And we're going to use a process called completing the square. All right, so we're going to start with a slightly easier example here. And I've got a parabola. It's in a general form right here. So the first thing we need to do is isolate the squared term. And by its family, they're referring to all terms with the same variable of any power. All right? So my squared term here is my x squared. All right? And its family would also include the 6x. So I want that by itself. So what we did here is they subtracted the 1 to get this thing back out of here. All right, so now you'll notice here we've got this x squared plus 6x. All right? Now to complete the square, if you remember, we did one just like this just before. We know this thing is going to come out. What we're going to need is an x plus 3 squared to get that. All right? Now, to do that, you know we're going to have to take half of this number right here, and that's this b squared over 2. So 6 over 2 gives us 3, and then you square it. So 6 over 2 is 3 squared, will give us a 9. And if you remember right, x plus 3 squared was x squared plus 6x plus 9. Now, because I've added a 9 over here, to keep the equation in balance, I also need to add a 9 over here. So now we come back in, and I've got my square here. So that's going to be x. Now 9 minus 1, that will give me y plus 8. And now again here, remember we took a look that this thing here was half of this term. Well, we already found it. That's our b over 2. So my b over 2 was 3. So this becomes x plus 3 squared, which is just a factored form of this thing right here. Okay? So we've got that. And basically what we've done at this point now is we have now completed the square. So now we want this in the form of y equals. So I'm going to subtract my 8. So y is going to equal to x plus 3 squared minus 8. All right? So if you're still confused on where I went from here to here, remember that x plus 3 times x plus 3 is my x plus 3 squared. All right? And that gets me this x squared plus 6x plus 9. And the whole point of rewriting the log was to have you guys see the relationship between b over 2 and this factored form right here. All right, so now we're ready to go. We've got it in form. My vertex, this is my h, so it's going to be negative 3. This is my k, it's negative 8. And this thing, because it's y equals and my a is positive, it's going to open up. Okay, so now let's take a look at some more of these things down here. We've got the same idea here. So my square term is my x squared. And the family would include that x term. So the first thing I want to do is subtract my 16 over. So I'm going to end up with y minus 16 is going to equal to x squared minus 10x. Now, before we go in and complete the square, you want to make sure I've got a 1 in front of the x squared, and I do. If not, you have to factor it out. So we're good there now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have y minus 16 is going to equal to x squared. Now I need to get the term out here that's going to allow me to complete the square. So what I do is I take half of negative 10, which is negative 5, and square it. That's going to be plus 25. So I'm going to have x squared minus 10x plus 25. That gets me my squared term. And because I added 25 out here, I need to add 25 out here. So now I simplify. I'm going to end up with y plus 9 equals, and remember to factor this, it's half of this b term. So it's going to be x minus 5 squared. And if you expand that, this gets you this. So now we're almost there. Now we're going to have y is going to equal to x minus 5 squared minus 9. And now we've got our vertex is going to be at, there's my h, so it's going to be 5, negative 9, and it's going to open up. Okay, so that's that one. Let's go in and take a look at this guy here. All right, now in this case, my square term is the y. So I'm going to end up with x minus 34 is going to equal to y squared minus 12y. So that gets in my square term and its family over there. So now we need to complete our square. So I'm going to end up with an x minus 34. That will equal to y squared minus 12y. And to complete it, I have to take half of this term, which is a negative 6. I usually write this up here. And I square it, so that will be plus 36. And then I have to add 36 over here. So now I have completed the square. So I'm going to end up with negative 34 plus 36 is going to give me x plus 2 will equal 2, and then we factor this guy. So it's going to be y, and half of that one minus 6 squared. And then I subtract my 2 over, so x is going to equal to y minus 6 squared minus 2. So my vertex, there's my h now, because it's an x equals. It's going to be negative 2, 6. It's positive, so this thing is going to open to the right. Okay, so let's take a look at another one here. And this one gets a little nastier. Let's take a look at it. So on this one, it's my x term. So I'm going to subtract my 2y over. So I am going to have a negative 2y minus 10 is going to equal to x squared plus 8x. Okay, we're not going to worry about this for now, but we are going to worry about this guy. Again, I've got a 1 in front of there, so I'm going to take half of this term in order to complete the square, which is a 4. So I'm going to have a negative 2y minus 10. I'm going to have an x squared plus 8x, and then half of that, and then you square it, so it's going to give me 16. Because I added 16 over here, I need a plus 16 here. And now I'm going to end up with a negative 2y plus 6 is going to equal to x, and then you've got half of this term, which is 4, the x plus 4 squared. If you're having a problem with this, expand this out, and you'll see we're going to end up with this thing again. All right, so now I still have a little bit of a problem because I want a y equals. So what I'm going to do is factor a negative 2 out of here. That's going to leave me with y minus 3 will equal to x plus 4 squared. And then I've got, first thing I need to do then is divide by my negative 2. So I'm going to end up with a y minus 3 will equal to a negative 1/2 x plus 4 squared. Then I add it over, so I end up with y equals negative 1/2 x plus 4 squared plus 3. So my vertex now is, there's my h, it's inside, it's y equals. So my vertex is going to be at negative 4, 3. And because this is a negative, it's a y equals, it's going to open down. Okay, so let's go on to page 2. I'm going to work a lot more examples of these things. Now on this one, you'll notice we've got both an x squared term and a y squared term. So what are we going to do here? Now, to figure out what this thing is, again, you take a look just at your x squared and y squared. These are both the same. They're both positive, and they're both the same coefficient, so that's going to make this a circle. Now, to do this, we basically do the same idea we did on the other one. So we're going to group all the x terms, in other words, anything which has an x of any power together, and the y terms together on the same side, and then move our constant over. So what they did here was they grouped their x squared and their 4x, that's this thing right here, and then they grouped their y squared minus 8y, which is this thing. They moved the 29 over. So now we are ready to complete the square for each one of these. So I've got an x squared plus 4x. And if you remember, you take half of b. So half of b is 2. So I'm going to end up with a 2 squared, which is 4. So I add a 4 in here. I also add a 4 out there. Then we do the same thing over here. I've got a negative y, so that's going to give me a negative 4 squared, which means I'm going to have a plus 16. And I need to add a 16 out here. Okay? And now we come back in, we factor this. So this is going to be x plus half of b, 2 squared, plus y minus 4 squared will be equal to 49. So my center then is going to be at negative 2, 4, and my radius will be 7. So let's work some of these as an example. So the first thing I want to do then is get my x squared minus 4x plus, and then y squared minus 6y equals, and I'm going to move that over 51. So now I'm going to complete my square. So I'm going to have x squared minus 4x, then take half of that, which is going to give me a negative 2. I'm going to square it. It's give me plus 4. And since I just added the 4 in over there, I have to do it over here. And then I do the same thing there over here. So I'm going to have plus my y squared minus 6y. Half of this is a negative 3 squared. That's going to be plus 9 plus 9. Then we factor this out. So this will be x minus 2 squared plus y minus 3 squared will equal 64. And wow, looky there. Now we're in vertex form, or we're in working form. We can do this. So my center is going to be at 2, 3, and my radius will be 8. Let's do the same thing over on this one. So I'm going to have an x squared plus 8x. And when you first do this, I strongly discourage you from trying to skipping these steps. Then y squared minus 2y equals 19. Okay, so now we're ready to complete our squared. And remember, I'm missing this term out here to do that. So it's x squared plus 8x. And so then I take half of my 8, which is my b term, so it's going to be 4 squared. So it's going to be plus 16. And then I'm going to have plus, then we'll have my y squared minus 2y. So half of negative 2 is going to be negative 1 squared. So it's going to be plus 1 plus 1. And now I can factor this out. That's going to give me an x plus 4 squared plus y minus 1 squared. And remember, I'm taking half of my b will equal to 36. And there we got it. So my center is going to be at negative 4, 1. My radius will be 6. Okay, let's work another one, or another 2. Actually, I'm going to work another 1, and then I'm going to expect to come in. When you come in, I'm going to have you work number 7 on your own and show all steps. So the question is, you can go ahead and copy this from someone else, or do it on your own and get practice. As soon as you have these entry questions, I'll allow you to get to work, and you do not have to do them at the beginning of class. Let's take a look at this one. So I'm going to group my x squared plus 5x term plus, and then my y squared minus 14y equal to negative 39.25. I'll move that over. All right, so now I'm ready to complete my squares. So that's going to give me x squared plus 5x. And half of 5x is 5 halves. So that's going to give me 25 fourths. Square both top and bottom. So I've got a negative 39.25 plus, and 25 fourths is 6 1/4, 6.25. And then do the same thing over here. So I take half of my 14, which is a negative 7. Square it. So that's going to give me y squared minus 14y plus 49. And then I add a plus 49 out here. So this is going to give me x plus half of 5 is 2 1/2 squared plus y minus 7 squared. And when you add all of this thing up, you end up with with 16. Or my center then is going to be at negative 2.5, 7, and my radius is 4. Okay, so remember, work this one on your own. It really will help you in the long run. All right, page 3. This is where things get a little bit more complicated. Not a lot, because now all of a sudden we're going to have something in front of both our x squared term. So again, we did the same thing here. We collected our x terms, we collected our y terms, and we move our constant term over here. Now you notice I had a 16 in front of my x term. So we factored the 16 out. That leaves x squared minus, then when I divide 64 by 16, I end up with a minus 4x. And same thing here, I've got a 25 here. So that leaves me with y squared plus 6y, 150 divided by 25 equals that. Okay, so now we're ready to complete our square. So half of negative 4 is a negative 2. Squared gives me a plus 4. Now you notice this plus 4 is inside the parentheses. So what we have to do here is add in my 4 times the 16 that's out front, because that's really what I've added in. Okay? And that was a 64. Okay, and we do the same thing here, so this is going to be 3 squared. So that's going to give me 9. And then what I'm going to add in here is going to be the 9 times coefficient out front, the 25. And 9 times 25 is 225. Now I'm ready to complete the square, so I've got a 16 over x minus half of my b term, what I squared, x minus 2 squared, plus 25, and I'm going to have y plus 3 squared. And when I add everything together over here, I end up with 400. Okay, now this is an ellipse, and the way you can tell is these are both positive, but they've got different coefficients. So that makes it an ellipse. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide. And we want this equal to 1. So I'm going to divide everything by 400. And I mean everything here by 400. And then I reduce my fraction. So I'm going to have x minus 2 squared, y plus 3 squared, and 16 over 400 reduces to 25. And you should start seeing a pattern here if you pay attention. And then 25 over 400 is 16 equals 1. So this is an ellipse. All right. The center is at 2, negative 3. A is 5, B is 4. And now we can graph this thing. All right, so I'm going to work one more of these. And then this one right here is due on your own. Show all steps. If you just come in with the answer, I'm going to make you sit down and do it in class, and you'll miss the class time to work on your assignment. Okay, so the first thing we do here is collect my x squared terms. I've got x squared minus 6x. This is nice. And then plus 49 y squared plus 196y equals negative 156. So this one I can go with. I'm going to have x squared minus 6x. This one I'm going to have to factor my 49 out. So that's going to leave me with y squared plus 196 divided by that is 4y. Negative 156. So now we're ready to complete our square. So this is a negative 3 squared, so it's going to give me x squared minus 6x plus 9 . Okay, then plus 49 times half of that is going to give me y squared, and I'm going to have 2 squared plus 4y plus 4. And I'm going to have to multiply my 4 by 49, which will give me a plus 196. And then when I factor these back out, half of my b, give me x minus 3 squared plus 49. And half of that is going to give me y plus 2 squared. And that will equal to 49. And then I divide everything by 49, so I equal 1. So I'm going to end up with x minus 3 squared over 49. Plus 49 over 49 gives me 1. So that's just going to give me y plus 2 squared over 1. And again, this gives me an ellipse. The center will be at 3, negative 2. A is 7, and B is 1. Okay, now on this one, you'll notice you've got a negative 4. So what you're going to need to do is factor when you get your, we'll start you off, you're going to have a 9x squared plus 90x. And you need to factor a 9 out of here. You're going to have a minus 4. Well, let's just group my terms. I've got a minus 4y squared plus 8y equals negative 185. So I'm going to want to factor a negative 4 out of here. When I factor negative 4, I'm going to end up with a y squared. And you divide this, you should end up with a negative 2y. You need to do the same thing here, factor it out. And take a look at it. Now, because that's a negative, that should tell you that this thing is going to be a hyperbola. Okay, let's take a quick look at page number 4 then. Really? Oh, man. There we go. All right. So here we're dealing with these things, circles. You notice that every one of these, my x squared and y squared, have the same sign. And my coefficients is going to be 1. B is the coefficient of the y squared term, so that is 1. My c is my x term, so that's 4. My d is negative 8, and my e is my constant, which is a negative 29. And this is a circle because these two numbers are the same sign and the same amount. Same thing for this one. My A is 1, my B is 1, my C, which is my x term, is 5, the negative 14, and 39.25. And remember, these are the two terms you're taking half of to get it out, to complete the square. Okay, then I've got a 1, 1, 8, negative 2, and negative 19. You guys like to ignore these. 1. Now remember, b is my y squared term, so it's going to be over here, so it will also be 1. C is my x term, so it's 2. D is the y coefficient, it's 10. And my E is 15. Okay, on the ellipse, my A is 16. My B is 25. My C is negative 64. My D is 150. D is negative 111. Notice these are both positive, but they're different. That makes it an ellipse. Okay, hyperbola. My A term, or on this one has x squared has 1 in front of it. Y squared has 49 in front of it. Negative 6, 196, and 156. Okay, for the hyperbola, my x squared term is 9. My y squared term is negative 4. And then I've got 90, 8, and 185. Again, the important thing to remember here for hyperbola, they're opposite sides. Okay, on this one, my x squared term, and remember these all have to be, notice these are all equal to 0. Careful, these are not equal to 0. You've got to move everything over. So I'm going to do this one. These are on your own. And this one is yours to do. Okay, so on this one then, what you have to do is I'm going to have to move this over. So I'm going to end up with a y squared minus 12y plus 34 minus x. And that equals to 0. There's the form we wanted. They gave it to you. Okay, so A is the coefficient of my x squared term. We don't have an x squared term, so that means my A is 0. B is the coefficient of my y squared term. It's 1. C is the coefficient of my x term, so it's a negative 1. D is the coefficient of the y term. It's a negative 12. And E is my constant, so it is 34. And then the other two are the same. And what I want you to fill in down here then is equation of the form. If this is true, then A equals B, if it's a circle. If it's an ellipse, then A does not equal B, but A and B do have the same sign. Hyperbolas. We know that A and B have different signs. They can be equal, but they're going to have different signs. And a parabola, then only one term, then either A equals 0 or B equals 0, or only one term is squared. Okay, so what I want you to do on these is come in and identify your general form, okay? I know this is long, but this is an important concept. So come back in, make sure you do the ones I tell you that are yours. Come back in, I want to see you identify the conic. Tell me which one it is by looking at the x squared and the y squared terms on these.